I would suggest that if you really, really, really want to, you go and check out the Shoah Foundation. It was started in 1994 by, yes, a Jew. And by the way, you can't discount all Jewish research in this field because it's by Jews. It's a bit like discounting all research into the American Civil War because it's by Americans. They're the interested party here. Okay, Jews and Germans, and Americans and Americans. Can you see how that might work? I'm a Brit. I mean, why would I go and write a book about the Holocaust? Well, I might do because my granddad was vaguely involved in some of the camps at the end of the war and liberating them. So that's kind of a link for me. But I don't have any ethnic or visceral or religious connection to it in the same way that Jewish people do. So I might write a book. Jewish people that were involved in it are much more likely to write the books. Hence, most of the books about it are by Jewish people, which if you think Jews are fundamentally unreliable, which if you're a Nazi you do, means you can discount all their evidence, apparently. Okay, you can see how that's self-referential and completely pointless. The second part of this doozy that you pulled out, bodies don't burn. Okay, right. For this, I refer you to a third book. And it's not related to the Holocaust, and it's not written by a Jew. It's called Dresden, and it's written by a guy called Frederick Taylor. It's about what you mentioned, which is an atrocity that was committed by the RAF in the form of bombing Dresden. I mean, point of fact, actually, I think they did the right thing. But the point of this is that in the course of literally a couple of days of bombing between, and the US got their act in this as well, but basically between 13th and 14th of February 1945, British bombers completely flattened Dresden. They killed a vast number of people. They killed a really, really huge number of people, and they dehoused about 350,000 people. It's actually quite hard to know exactly how many people they killed, but the interesting thing here is that there are a series of witness statements about how they dealt with the burning of the bodies immediately after the bombing. You state in your video, and this is classic revisionist stuff, that human bodies don't spontaneously burn. Quite right, they don't. But human bodies with a little bit of petrol or other combustible ignition material will quite happily burn. I will quote this as about dealing with the end of the bombing and how it was handled in order to stop the spread of typhus through the city as a result of rotting bodies being everywhere. And I quote This is by a guy called Eldering, who was head of police in Dresden. It became imperative to further speed up the rate of work, for in consequence of mild weather the corpses were beginning to decay. ... To avoid the outbreak of infectious disease, the Altstadt was declared, and that Altstadt is the primary square inside of Dresden. The Altstadt was declared a prohibited area. There remained no choice but to give permission for the corpses to be burned. He then goes on to talk about how they were kept off the ground in order to make sure that a draft was kept underneath the mass funeral pyres. Workers found a solution in the wreck of a nearby department store where massive girders had survived the bombing. They carried them from the ruins and set them down on the ground, making, as a contemporary grimly expressed it, huge grill racks. Large amounts of gasoline were trucked into the sealed city centre. Teams poured petrol over the bodies as they were laid on the shutters. Then the dead were burned at the rate of 1 pyre per day, with around 500 corpses per pyre, which were then topped up as the bodies continued to burn. The point of this is, once you start to burn bodies, you can add more bodies to it, and you don't need any more combustion fuel, because human factor does all the work. Is on page 400 and 401 of this book here. It's an interesting reference because it has nothing to do with the Holocaust whatsoever, although they do go on to mention that they believe that the staff that brought the expertise came from Treblinka, and that was where they'd learned how to do this in the first place. Oh, but that would... Oh, yeah. Moving swiftly on then. So, I'm sorry, bodies burn just fine. Female bodies, I've no idea whether they burn better than male bodies. I have no clue, but I could completely believe that they might, because their fat reserves are different from men's. And once you've got it going, you don't need more. You just stick more bodies on, it keeps burning, provided you do it at the right rate and you keep the bodies off the ground. The other part of it is, if you are actually burning bodies, it's relatively straightforward to get rid of the ash. There isn't very much left. The other part that goes on, and I'm not going to quote the whole thing, but it talks about how little ash actually came out after that because it was so efficient at breaking down human bone. Far more efficient than it would be if you went to a crematorium today and you had your granny burnt, for example, where they still need to crush pelvises and skulls and that sort of stuff, which is the other revisionist load of old cobblers. Moving swiftly on then. You then go off on one, frankly, about Treblinka, and you talk about all kinds of exciting things that you blame. You basically try and say, this one witness that we were using in the Nuremberg trials has some flaws in his testimony, which basically mean that Treblinka didn't exist. Which is stunning, because, did I mention the Shoah Foundation? They've got 50,000 people's records, talking to camera like I'm talking to you now, about what happened to them, when it happened to them, how it happened to them, and all of the associated evidence. Go on there and tell me all 50,000 people are wrong, and then I will believe there was no Holocaust. You talk about... I'm not going to pick it all up. You talk about, for example, the hair going into mattresses. Why the hell would the guy even know where the hair was going? My guess is that he was embellishing his story. Whoa. You've spent a year in a death camp watching literally thousands of people being killed every single day, and you hypothesize what's going to happen next. And maybe you've got some mental problems. You could see how that could happen, right? I have no idea whether or not the hair was put into mattresses. I have no idea whether or not the Jews that came in were actually infected with lice, or whether it was a way of degrading the prisoners, which is what it seems to have been in many cases. You do, of course, when you take people into a prison, and you plan to keep them in the long term, delouse them first because it's worthwhile. Whether you would have done it in a death camp like Treblinka, I don't know. What I do know, and what you can go and see down probably any one of a number of Holocaust museums, you can certainly see it in the Imperial War Museum in London, which isn't a Holocaust museum, is you can see Luftwaffe boots and U-boat boots, U-boat crew boots, that are stuffed with human hair. The assumption is that they came from concentration camps. There was no national call for materials to be provided for this sort of thing, and yet there it is. This is another general point. Hitler did not want to disturb the normal running of day-to-day life inside Germany until he absolutely had to. It's one of the reasons that Hitler was so fucking shite at his job, was his inability to actually get his economy to work for him. And his continual changing of mind. I'm not going to digress down that, except to say that Albert Speer worked absolute miracles and showed what could have been achieved if he'd been put in charge of production in 1939 rather than 1944, when, frankly, the war was already lost.